15 plants, all available within 10 minutes of where you are sitting right now. What each one does, why your body responds to it the way it does, and exactly how to use it. Let's get started. Number 1. Ceylon cinnamon. The cinnamon in your cabinet is probably not cinnamon. Most grocery store spice jars labeled simply cinnamon contain Cassia, a related plant from a different species. Ceylon cinnamon, true cinnamon, the one ancient civilizations traded at prices that rivaled gold, is a different substance with a different chemical profile. In the ancient world, cinnamon was so valuable that Roman Emperor Nero burned an entire year's supply at his wife's funeral as the most extravagant gesture of grief available to him. Arab traders kept its geographic source secret for centuries to control the market. Egyptian pharaohs received it as tribute. The plant people were paying those prices for was Ceylon, lighter in color, more delicate in flavor, and botanically distinct from what fills most spice jars today. The distinction matters because Cassia contains significantly higher levels of a compound called coumarin, which in high daily amounts may place stress on the liver over time. Ceylon contains very little. If you are adding cinnamon to your food every day, which the research suggests is worth doing, the type you use matters. Multiple research reviews have examined Ceylon cinnamon's effect on blood sugar regulation, finding that the compounds in true cinnamon may support healthy insulin sensitivity, meaning the body's cells respond more efficiently to insulin. Researchers have noted these findings are promising, though they consistently recommend further study. What is clear is that the effect observed in studies used Ceylon, not Cassia. Check your spice jar. If it does not specify Ceylon or Sri Lankan origin, it is almost certainly Cassia. The price difference at most grocery stores is minimal. The difference in what you are actually consuming is not. You can add Ceylon cinnamon in your morning coffee, oatmeal, or warm water daily. The sticks can be simmered in water for 10 minutes as a simple tea. Buy from a source that specifies origin. The ancient world built entire trade empires around this spice. Most people are buying the cheaper substitute and calling it the same thing. Number 2. Raw honey. Notice what you reach for when a sore throat is bad enough that nothing else seems to be working. Almost everyone reaches for honey eventually. That instinct exists across every culture on Earth, not because of tradition, but because raw honey has real, documented properties that make it useful for exactly that situation. The key word is raw. What most people buy is not raw honey. Supermarket honey is typically filtered and heat processed to extend shelf life and create a clear, uniform appearance. That process removes the enzymes, the pollen, and the antimicrobial compounds that make raw honey biologically distinct from a sweetener. What remains after processing is largely sugar in liquid form. Raw honey contains naturally occurring hydrogen peroxide, enzymes produced during the hiving process, and a range of bioactive compounds that researchers have studied for their properties in laboratory settings. Researchers have also explored certain raw honeys against antibiotic-resistant bacteria such as MRSA in laboratory settings. These findings are not evidence that honey treats infections in people, but they help explain why scientists remain interested in its antimicrobial properties. Tutankhamun's tomb, opened in 1922, contained honey still in sealed jars, estimated at over 3,000 years old, and reportedly still edible. No synthetic food product approaches that kind of stability. Honey appears in the oldest surviving medical documents from Egypt, Greece, and China. Every tradition that had access to it used it, and every tradition distinguished between raw and processed forms, consistently favoring the unprocessed version for medicinal use. Number 3. Lion's mane mushroom. Your brain produces a protein called nerve growth factor. It is responsible for the maintenance of existing neurons and plays a role in the growth of new neural connections. Production of this protein tends to decline with age. Lion's mane mushroom contains 2 families of compounds, hericenones and erinacines, that researchers have found may stimulate the brain's own production of nerve growth factor. The significance of this is partly in the mechanism. These compounds are small enough to cross the blood-brain barrier, which means they can influence what happens inside the brain rather than acting only in the periphery. Japanese physicians in the Heian period, around 900 CE, documented lion's mane for cognitive conditions, describing it for mental clarity and what they observed as declining memory in older patients. A 2009 double-blind placebo-controlled trial found that participants who consumed lion's mane daily over 16 weeks showed improvements in cognitive function scores compared to those who did not, and that scores returned toward baseline after supplementation stopped. Researchers noted this suggested the effect required ongoing consumption to be maintained. Until recently, lion's mane was almost impossible to find outside of Asian specialty stores in America. It is now available fresh in most well-stocked grocery stores and farmers markets, and as dried powder in health food sections. That accessibility is new. The research behind it is not. Fresh lion's mane sautéed in butter or olive oil, mild flavor, meaty texture, and cooking does not appear to significantly reduce the active compounds. Dried powder mixed into coffee or tea daily, half a teaspoon to 1 teaspoon, is the more practical daily option. Number 4. Milk thistle. When someone arrives at a hospital in Europe having consumed a death cap mushroom, one of the most toxic mushrooms known, responsible for the majority of fatal mushroom poisonings worldwide, the treatment protocol in many clinical settings includes silymarin, the active compound derived from milk thistle seed. This is not a fringe application. Silymarin has been studied extensively for liver support and is used in clinical contexts across Europe, where plant-based medicines are more integrated into mainstream medical practice than they are in the United States. Research suggests that silymarin may support liver cell function through several mechanisms, including potentially protecting liver cells from certain forms of oxidative stress and supporting the liver's own repair processes. A 2005 review analyzing multiple studies found that silymarin was associated with improvements in liver enzyme markers in participants with liver stress. Researchers noted the findings were encouraging while calling for larger trials. Your liver performs over 500 documented metabolic functions. It processes every medication you take, every chemical in processed food, every drink of alcohol. It is the most metabolically active organ in the body and operates under a daily chemical load that has no historical precedent in human biology. Milk thistle has been used to support liver function in European herbal medicine for over 2,000 years. In the United States, it sits largely ignored in the supplement aisle. In parts of Europe, it is studied as a clinical tool. That gap in perception says more about institutional differences than it does about the plant. Number 5. Flaxseed. Most people who eat flaxseed think they are eating it for omega-3. That is not the most important thing in it. Flaxseed is the richest known dietary source of lignans, plant compounds that your gut bacteria convert into molecules that interact with estrogen pathways in the body. This process happens after you eat them, in your digestive system, and the result influences how the body processes and balances its own hormones. Researchers have studied lignans in the context of hormonal health in both men and women. A 2010 study found that women who consumed flaxseed daily reported a meaningful reduction in the frequency of hot flashes over the study period. Separate research has explored whether lignan intake is associated with hormonal balance markers in men, particularly relevant as estrogen levels tend to shift with age. These are areas of active research rather than settled conclusions, but the direction of the findings has been consistent enough to sustain ongoing scientific interest. Egyptian physicians used flaxseed medicinally over 5,000 years ago, making it one of the oldest cultivated plants with a documented medical history. It appears in records from ancient Babylon, Egypt, Greece, and Rome. The critical preparation note most people miss. Whole flaxseed passes through the digestive system largely intact. The compounds are inside the seed, protected by a shell your digestion cannot efficiently break down. Ground flaxseed is a meaningfully different product. Number 6. Beetroot. Your blood vessels have a lining called the endothelium. It runs through every organ in your body. The health of that lining determines how well blood, oxygen, and nutrients reach every tissue you have. The endothelium maintains itself partly through a molecule called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide signals blood vessels to relax and widen, allowing better flow and reducing the pressure the heart works against. Production of nitric oxide tends to decline with age and with sedentary lifestyle. Beetroot is one of the richest dietary sources of inorganic nitrates, compounds that the body converts into nitric oxide through a well-characterized biological pathway involving bacteria in your saliva and stomach acid. Research has found that dietary nitrate from beetroot may support healthy blood pressure and blood flow. A number of studies have explored beetroot juice in the context of physical performance, with researchers finding that participants showed improved endurance markers, an effect attributed to more efficient oxygen use in muscle tissue when nitric oxide is more available. Ancient Romans ate beets. So did the Babylonians. Medieval European physicians used beet preparations for what they described as blood conditions and circulation. They had no concept of nitric oxide. They had consistent observation that beets did something useful for physical vigor. The mechanism was identified much later. The deep red-purple color comes from betalains, antioxidant compounds that researchers have found show anti-inflammatory properties in laboratory studies. You are looking at the biology when you look at the color. Number 7. Black seed/nigella. Imagine finding a tiny jar of seeds sealed inside an Egyptian pharaoh's tomb after more than 3,300 years. Archaeologists did. The seeds were black seed. Centuries later, black seed was also mentioned in a saying attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, describing it as containing healing for every illness except death. That tradition helped preserve its use across the Middle East and South Asia for more than 1,400 years. Today, researchers are studying the same tiny seeds for their potential role in supporting healthy blood sugar, immune function, respiratory health, and the body's inflammatory response. Much of that interest centers on thymoquinone, its main active compound, which researchers have found interacts with the body's antioxidant and inflammatory pathways. Its appearance in Tutankhamun's tomb and its long history across Egyptian, Middle Eastern, and South Asian traditions helps explain why scientists eventually became interested in studying it. A 2021 systematic review found promising findings across multiple health areas, while concluding that larger, high-quality clinical trials are still needed. Number 8. Kefir. Notice how your mood shifts when your digestion is off. Not just physically uncomfortable, actually different in terms of energy, clarity, and emotional tone. That connection has a biological basis. Your gut produces a significant portion of the body's serotonin, a neurotransmitter that influences mood, sleep, and appetite. The bacteria living in your digestive system play a direct role in that production process. When the balance of those bacteria shifts, the downstream effects extend well beyond digestion. Kefir is not the same as yogurt. Commercial yogurt typically contains 1 to 5 bacterial strains. Traditionally, fermented kefir contains between 30 and 56 distinct strains. Kefir also contains kefiran, a compound produced only during kefir fermentation that researchers have found may support the integrity of the intestinal lining. Kefir originated in the Caucasus Mountains, a region documented for unusually high concentrations of long-lived populations across multiple demographic studies. Researchers investigating longevity in those communities consistently noted kefir as a daily dietary staple. A 2021 randomized controlled trial found that participants who consumed kefir daily over 4 weeks showed improvements in microbiome diversity and reductions in inflammatory markers, findings the researchers described as more pronounced than those seen with a high-fiber diet alone during the same period. Number 9. Oregano oil. Why do populations eating Mediterranean diets consistently show certain health advantages that researchers have spent decades trying to isolate and explain? Olive oil is the most studied variable, but wild oregano, used freely in Mediterranean cooking for over 2,000 years, is one of the less examined contributors that researchers are beginning to pay more attention to. The oregano in your spice cabinet and the medicinal oregano oil that has been studied in research are not the same substance. Wild oregano grown in the rocky, dry, mineral-poor soils of the Mediterranean develops dramatically higher concentrations of its active compounds than commercially cultivated varieties, because environmental stress drives the plant to produce more of its own defensive chemistry. Carvacrol, the primary active compound, is that chemistry. Researchers studying carvacrol in laboratory settings have found it demonstrates antimicrobial properties against a range of bacterial and fungal targets through a mechanism involving disruption of cell membrane integrity. A 2011 study examining oil of oregano found researchers observed significant antimicrobial activity in controlled conditions. These are laboratory findings. They do not translate directly to clinical treatment claims. What they do explain is why Hippocrates used oregano medicinally over 2,400 years ago, and why traditional Mediterranean populations who consumed it daily may have experienced certain protective effects. The medicinal form is not the dried spice. It is cold-pressed oil from wild-harvested plants with verified carvacrol content. These are different products from the same species. Number 10. Green tea. Most people making green tea are inadvertently reducing its most researched compound before they drink it. EGG, epigallocatechin gallate, is the primary bioactive compound in green tea and the focus of over 1,500 peer-reviewed studies. It breaks down significantly at high temperatures. Boiling water is approximately 212 degrees Fahrenheit. EGG begins degrading meaningfully above 185 degrees. Most people pour boiling water directly over green tea leaves and steep them for 5 or more minutes. Water at 170 degrees, a few minutes off the boil, steeped for 2 to 3 minutes, is the preparation that preserves EGG content. EGG has been studied for its interaction with cellular energy regulation pathways, its effects on brain function, and its antioxidant properties in tissue. Researchers have noted that populations with high green tea consumption show certain health patterns that have sustained scientific interest for decades, though isolating green tea as the specific variable in population studies is methodologically complex. Japanese Buddhist monks brought green tea cultivation from China to Japan in the 9th century, specifically for its effects during long meditation sessions. They needed sustained alertness without agitation. Green tea contains both caffeine and L-theanine, an amino acid that research suggests promotes a state of calm focus. EEG studies have found L-theanine associated with increased alpha wave activity, the pattern associated with relaxed but alert mental states. The monks were observing a real effect. The neuroscience gave it a name. Number 11. Turmeric. Most people think they are getting turmeric's benefits from cooking. They are largely not, and the reason comes down to two things most people have never heard of: bioavailability and heat. Curcumin, the compound in turmeric that researchers study, breaks down with sustained high heat and is poorly absorbed by the body on its own. The majority of it passes through without being taken up into the bloodstream in meaningful amounts. Studies examining curcumin's anti-inflammatory properties in laboratory settings have found strong activity. Translating that to human consumption requires addressing the absorption problem. The solution has existed in Indian cooking for thousands of years without anyone knowing the biochemistry. Black pepper contains a compound called piperine. Research has found that piperine dramatically increases curcumin absorption. Some studies report the increase at around 2,000%. Ancient Indian cooks combined turmeric and black pepper in virtually every preparation. They were not following a health recipe. They were following what worked, observed across generations. The mechanism was identified much later by researchers who noticed the absorption differential. India has used turmeric continuously for over 4,000 years. It appears in Ayurvedic texts as one of the most consistently recommended plants across a range of applications. Curcumin is one of the most studied plant compounds in the scientific literature, with thousands of peer-reviewed papers examining it across multiple contexts. Number 12. Berberine. 3,000 years ago, physicians in China, physicians in India, and healers in the Native American tradition were all using plants from different botanical families for overlapping conditions: digestive complaints, infections, what they described as metabolic imbalance. These traditions had no contact with each other. They were working in different languages, different geographies, different cultural frameworks. They arrived at plants, gold thread, barberry, Oregon grape, that shared one thing in common: a yellow alkaloid called berberine. Berberine has been studied extensively in recent years, with researchers finding it interacts with a cellular enzyme pathway involved in energy metabolism and glucose regulation. Multiple studies have examined berberine in people with blood sugar concerns, with researchers generally finding improvements in fasting glucose and other metabolic markers over study periods ranging from 8 weeks to several months. A 2008 study published in a metabolism journal examined berberine alongside a pharmaceutical standard of care for blood sugar management. Finding berberine produced notable results in the study participants. Researchers described the findings as warranting further clinical investigation. Oregon grape grows wild across the Pacific Northwest of the United States. Barberry grows in gardens and hedgerows across the country. The same compound that drew researchers to run those trials is sitting in plants that grow in American soil without cultivation. Number 13. Walnuts. A walnut half looks like a brain hemisphere. Medieval physicians operating under the doctrine of signatures, the idea that a plant's appearance indicated its medicinal application, recommended walnuts for the brain based on this resemblance alone. Modern nutritional research did not set out to validate a medieval visual metaphor, but the convergence of findings around walnuts and cognitive health is notable enough that it has sustained research interest for several decades. Walnuts are the only common nut with meaningful ALA omega-3 fatty acid content. They are among the richer food sources of polyphenols that research suggests can cross the blood-brain barrier and influence neural tissue. They also contain melatonin in a bioavailable form, which is unusual for a whole food. A 2020 study found that adults who consumed walnuts daily showed higher scores on cognitive performance assessments compared to those who did not, after researchers controlled for other dietary variables. A clinical trial examining cardiovascular markers found daily walnut consumption associated with improvements in LDL and total cholesterol measurements over 8 weeks. The FDA permits a qualified health claim for walnuts related to heart health, a designation that requires a meaningful standard of evidence to achieve. Spanish missionaries planted walnut trees across California in the 18th century at every settlement they established, as both food and medicine. The California walnut industry that exists today grows from those original plantings. Number 14. Ginger. Fresh ginger and dried ginger are not the same medicine. This is not a subtle distinction. The primary active compounds change during the drying process. Fresh ginger is highest in gingerols, compounds that researchers have found support digestive function and gastric motility. When ginger is dried, gingerols convert into shogalls, a related but different class of compounds that research suggests have stronger anti-inflammatory properties, particularly relevant to joint and muscle discomfort. Your ancestors used both forms and used them for different things, not because they understood the chemistry, but because they observed different outcomes. A clinical study found that fresh ginger extract supported faster gastric emptying in study participants. This matters for people who experience bloating, fullness, or discomfort after meals. Separate research has examined dried ginger for its effects on inflammatory markers, with findings that have made it one of the more studied spices in the anti-inflammatory literature. Ginger has been in continuous medical use for over 5,000 years. In medieval England, a pound of it cost the equivalent of a sheep. Arab, Chinese, and Indian medical traditions each documented it independently for overlapping applications: digestion, nausea, joint discomfort, representing one of the clearest cases of cross-cultural convergent observation in plant medicine history. Number 15. Garlic. The garlic most people cook with is not delivering what people think it is delivering. The preparation method is the entire issue. Allicin, the compound that makes garlic biologically significant, does not exist in an intact clove. It forms through a chemical reaction that only begins when the clove is physically damaged. When you crush or chop garlic, two previously separated compounds come into contact and produce allicin. That process takes approximately 10 minutes to complete fully, and allicin breaks down rapidly with heat. By the time a chopped clove has been in a hot pan for a few minutes, the majority of the allicin is gone. Crush the clove, wait 10 minutes, then use it, raw, or add it at the very end of cooking off the heat. That 10-minute window is the difference between garlic as a flavoring and garlic as the substance that Roman soldiers carried on campaigns, that World War I field medics applied to wounds when standard antiseptics were unavailable, and that ancient physicians across Egypt, China, Greece, and India documented independently over thousands of years. Researchers studying garlic have found allicin and its derivatives demonstrate antimicrobial properties in laboratory settings. Epidemiological research has associated regular garlic consumption with certain cardiovascular markers. The preparation method determines whether you are actually consuming meaningful amounts of the relevant compounds. Aged black garlic is worth knowing as a separate preparation. When garlic is fermented slowly over several weeks, allicin converts into stable antioxidant compounds with different but complementary properties, and a milder flavor that most people find more manageable than raw garlic.